So since we're both based in Latin America, but we are in Italy, I'm Italian, so we have connection to, let's say, Italy and Latin America. What we thought of doing today was to talk about a few Brazilian, Peruvian artists and a couple of Italian artists. I wanted to start by asking Carlos why is he collecting contemporary art, since his collection is really just contemporary art and mainly quite young artists.
Art connects your mind, your heart, and I've been collecting pre-Columbian when I was 18 to 29. I was 34 years old, so the last 15 years I've been collecting contemporary. The idea of buying young artists is to see them grow along their careers and be part of the process.
This is an example of something very new, very recent production. He's been doing this kind of sculptures for the last few years. And more than what you see, actually what is interesting in this work is how it is done. And it's in that sense it's very significant in what it does, because he's much more interested in this case in the process that brings to the production of the piece than on the formal aspect of the piece itself. So what he does, he makes some molds, and the molds are used to make the sculptures, but they're not used in the conventional way. When you do a mold and then you take something out which is exactly what you planned it would be. Like in this case, he puts in the material that he used other objects apart from the clay. He puts some pigments to have some colors in it, and then basically what comes out is different every time. I mean every time, because he uses the same mold to do different sculptures. And this is part of a series of works that he's been doing. The first one of this series were, to me, conceptually, if not formally, even more interesting, because what he did, he created a few molds. I don't know if you know these pieces. They were beautiful. They look like sculptures, like maquettes of buildings in a way, but the sides of the molds were so thin that he actually knew that when he was going to take the work out, they would break. And then he would try to assemble the part of the sculpture that broke, obviously because he already knew it would break, in different ways. So he had different sculptures made from the same molds. They all look different, and in a way it became clear that what he was interested about was not at all the format or the form that the work would have in the end. He's an artist who's very into doing things with his own hands, or he has a beautiful video photo, I don't know if you know this one, it's beautiful, where it just shows people working with hands and creating, actually in that case, a maquette. So the fact of doing things with his own hands, or filming people doing things with their hands, and also dealing with local, not only Peruvian, but local crafts. He brought craftsmen from Africa also into his work, or from Brazil, or from Peru, from different places, is very important. And then all this this sculpture that you see that is very rough is placed on a plinth that is also not extremely luxurious in its aspect, but is extremely carefully planned, exactly to be underneath this work. So it might look casual in a way, but with him it's always a matter of whether the iron bar is 20.7 or 22 centimeter high. So it's funny, in a way he's giving way more attention to what we consider the base of the work than on the sculpture itself. And that's, if you want, something that also puts him in a very long tradition that goes back to Brancusi, as we all know, who was extremely interested in what conventionally would be considered just a plinth where the actual sculpture lays, but in fact the whole thing becomes one thing.
I know Armando since the beginning of his career. I like to meet young artists and see all the process, and in the case of Armando, I know he's very young. He's exposed a lot to architecture and the form and the process. He has been raised surrounded by art. His father is a big collector, but what's interesting on his career and his thinking process is he's always thinking and looking for contrast. And for example, on his work he has a strong presence of architecture, and also he's abroad, but he has not lost his soul. He's Peruvian, and always he's bringing his culture and what he has been living since very young into his work. And as you said, his pieces are fantastic, and he's also very involved in the process and questioning himself.
And another example of this that we wanted to show you is Galleria Continua, which you probably know since it's a very important, one of the most important Italian galleries for sure. They've been working for the last 3 or 4 years with three Brazilian artists actually: Marcelo Cidade, who we will talk about, André Komatsu, and Jonatas de Andrade. André Komatsu and Cidade are from São Paulo, and Jonatas de Andrade is from the north of Brazil. And this is a piece that comes actually from the exhibition that they have right now at Galleria Continua in San Gimignano. It's part of a series of works that Cidade did that are conceived as homage to Dan Flavin, and they're called a monument for Tatlin because Dan Flavin already did homage to Vladimir Tatlin, the Soviet artist, and these works both relate directly to Dan Flavin and to Tatlin.
Well, I know Marcelo since 2007. I bought his first work. Marcelo is an artist that is also he has a very good thinking process, and he works a lot with the street. In this case, he makes an appropriation of these objects, and he has the ability to construct a very interesting geometry. Inside here is a fantastic work. It's made with a blanket that poor people used to cover them on the street, and then with those blankets he created a fantastic geometry also, because visually it looks very, very nice, but what's more important is what's on behind of the work, no?
Yeah, like Carlos said, basically all his works, and just like André Komatsu, these other artists, they're very urban artists, but specifically in this work, what I think is interesting, like Carlos was saying, is that he's appropriating the shape of the Dan Flavin and is appropriating the material. So in a way, he's building a new work by a double appropriation of both a symbolic form and a form that comes from art history. And also, of course, the fact that the lights are not there anymore is very symbolic in a way. You could read in that the end of all the utopias that Tatlin was. I mean, you know, Tatlin is a symbol of the utopias for the monument to the Third International, which is this huge sculpture/building monument that was supposed to be built and was never built because it was just totally utopian. And if you think about the fact that these things produced light and now they don't produce light anymore, there is a beautiful reading of it as the end of all the utopias that you could do. And this is something that for totally Marxist left-wing artists like Marcelo Cidade and Komatsu is something that is very present. Although they do artworks that you should consider totally abstract, they're in fact artworks that are always totally connected with the context where they're done, or from where they're done, since these were done in Italy, but from their background of low middle class in complex environments like São Paulo. And they're able to go way beyond that and create works that are extremely interesting and extremely well connected to a whole genealogy of art history, like Vladimir Tatlin, Dan Flavin, and so on.
So I have a question for both of you. Thank you already for this. This ping pong, which is functioning like pretty well, so to have the focus of the curatorial focus and the perspective of the collector. My question would be. Have you both have a relation to the work of Marcelo?
I'm always hunting for young talent, and I've been doing my lesson also with new Italian talent. And in the case of Brazil, I think Marcelo, Komatsu, Jonatas de Andrade, they are fantastic artists, and I've been following since they were very young. I normally look for artists that are 27, 28, 30, 31, so I can see their careers along, and in some cases will be able to have some works of different steps of their career, so I can have a more profound view of their works. And through Galleria Vermelho, which is fantastic, they have this fantastic program, I was able to meet them, I've talked to them, I know what they have been thinking and see their evolution, no? And Jacopo is a good friend, and he lives in Sao Paulo, so he's all the day in.
Yeah. Well, I met Marcelo in a little bit before Carlos in 2005. Actually, I was working at the Biennial in Sao Paulo, and he was one of the artists in the Biennial in 2006. So that's how I got to meet him. And it was an interesting time also, because he did a very, very, very polemic thing, and it was very complex, because we basically had two works. One work that then turned into a performance. The work was he wanted to install in the whole Biennial these devices that block the cellular signal, cell phone signal, because in Brazil everybody, all the guys that are in prison, they just talk any way they want with everybody in all Brazil, and they direct, very often illegal action, so to say, outside from inside the prison. So he wanted to install that in the biennial, and then there was a huge problem and scandal. So they told him that they would install it, but they never really installed it. So in the night of the opening, he made a performance, and he got into the Biennale building with a cell phone, and he was able to make a few phone calls. But he did that with a guy from the press, and then it got into the press. So it was a big scandal, the kind of scandal that biennials usually create and love. Yeah. Francesco Arena, he's an artist. He's not very, very young for the standard of youth that we have now in contemporary art, but he's a very interesting artist, and he's been lately being very much exposed, which I think is very much deserved. I mean, if you go around Turin, in fact, you will see his work both at Castello di Rivoli now and the Museo Ettore Fico. There's a couple of works by him. He's an artist who always, or in most of his works, deals with measurements. And what he does, he usually starts with the measurements of his own body and combines that in weird ways with measurements of historical facts and episodes. And this is a very nice way. The formal resolution, and I think there is a nice link with Marcello Sidagi, for example. The formal resolution is totally abstract, like in this case, but you always have to know what the story behind is. So in this case, it's the size of his body with his open arms stretched, and he used the bar, which is the length of the bar is the length that you can buy in commerce. So he basically makes almost a square, and then there is a whole discussion about how his body is not perfectly sized according to Vitruvius' dimension, that you would have to have more of a rectangular, and in this case it's more of a square. So this is a more sophisticated reading, but what I like about his work in general is the fact how he's able to bring you through a totally abstract artwork, bring you to think about either what a human body should be, or in most cases about what an historical episode or event is. So this is another example. This is in fact is a measurement, and it's the size of Nietzsche's body, because Nietzsche is one of the references, one of the many philosophical references that Francesco uses in his work. Apart from historical episodes, he also has a very direct link to the work of many philosophers. So he did works on Wittgenstein, he used Nietzsche in some of his works, and this is another example of a very abstract piece that in fact relates to very specific measurements. And in this case it's even more clear how the whole thing is just an excuse in a way, because then you can have it in different ways. This one of the two blocks could be on a chair, or they could be vertical. It doesn't really matter the way it looks. It's much more the way you're brought to think about something, no?
It's funny, I will tell you a crazy story. I came here and met the director, and a friend of mine told me I was going to buy this work. And I said, he's a young artist. And a friend of us told me, I saw a work in Milano at the gallery, which are different pieces that create the height of the Buddha that was destroyed in Afghanistan. So I saw the photographs and immediately connect, get in love, and get mad. So I bought the piece, and I'm going to see the piece on Monday in Milan, but I bought it by photo because it was really, really fantastic. And when you're looking young artists, if you can buy an important work, it makes a difference, because you will be able for your collection to have a very important work, and also you will support the artist because he's just beginning, and a good work will be put in a collection. It's like you are validating his work, and both of us will be very happy.
And the work, just for you to get a better idea of what it is, it's a series of 160, something like that, sculptures, so to say. They're triangular sculpture because they were done using the shape of the angle, all the angles in his house. Like I said, it's very often a relation to his own personal body, or to his house, or to his memories. So in that case, he found the exact length that every piece should have, so that when you add them all up, you have the height of the Buddha. So it might look at first sight as a very easy way of doing things, like there is no direct connection, of course, between his house and the Buddhas, but when you start thinking about it, it brings you it gives you a more direct relation to like I was saying, historical episodes or accidents, tragedies, a relation that is so personal that you don't normally have. You know, like when we see the Buddhas destroyed, we don't really connect physically to that, and then suddenly that becomes possible. No, I think that's where the interest of the work lies, at least for me.